been a couple months since we've had our last vertical worship service, so it's good to be able to worship together and pray together and hear how God is working in your life. And Tim and I have been looking forward to giving our presentation. We were planning to do it last month, and of course Joanne ended up in the hospital, and so I said, Tim, you just take care of your wife. When she's feeling better, we'll schedule this again. So I'm glad you're feeling better. I'm glad we can do that. So we're going to do a little tag team in here. I'm going to share some things and then hand it over to Tim and let him share some things from his perspective, and share at the end some takeaways that we've had from this trip, and give you the opportunity, time permitting, to ask a few questions. So let's get started here. Yes, you're probably thinking, yeah, it makes sense. Pastor Rex, pastor, wants to go to Israel. Great. How did Tim end up going with it? I asked Tim, did anybody ever approach you? And no, nobody ever asked. I said, I'm sure they were thinking it, though. I'm sure they were thinking. So here's what happened, all right? I just happened to be having a conversation with Tim and Joanne one day, and mentioned, it was last summer, I think it was, that, I'm planning to go to Israel. And Joanne says, can anybody go with you? And I said, actually, there was somebody I was hoping was going to be able to go with me, a friend, and he can't. And I would love to go with somebody that I know. And Joanne says, Tim has always wanted to go to Israel. And I said, Tim, I'd love for you to go with me. And so that's how it worked out. And our trip got postponed. I think we were planning to go. Was it the May time frame that you were originally going to go last year? The September. And that got postponed, not because of COVID, believe it or not, but because of the tension that was going on between the Palestinians and the Jews at that time. And things settled down, and then, of course, the Omicron virus, and we thought it was going to be postponed again, but by God's providence, we were able to go. So this is the team that went. There were 35 of us. Most of them were from one church in Vancouver, Washington. 30 of them, I believe, were from Vancouver. And 5 of us were from the East Coast. Of course, Tim and I. And there was a woman from Rochester, New York, and another couple from Buffalo, New York. So we all met up in Newark, New Jersey, and then flew over to Tel Aviv together. We got to Tel Aviv several hours before everybody else, and so we got to rest and relax, and while they were traveling into the country. This is David Whiting, the pastor of New Heights Church in Vancouver, Washington, and his wife, Sue. Dave led the trip. That's how I found out about it. Dave used to be a pastor in Rochester, New York, where I, not at the same church, but in the city where I served as an associate pastor. And our two churches had done some things together in the past. As a matter of fact, David graduated from the same seminary as me, not the same time frame, but he went back and taught some classes as an adjunct professor, so I took some classes with him as well. So we knew each other, and when I found out he was leading another trip to Israel, I asked if I could be a part of it, and he graciously said yes. I'd love to have you come. This was our tour guide. He is a Messianic Jew who lives in Jerusalem. His name is Mickey, and he added great perspective to the different sites that we visited. He has education in archaeology and history, and I think he had some connections with a museum for a while, and so just a head of knowledge and was able to just give some great insights when we were visiting different places. So that's how it would go. He would share the archaeological perspective, historical perspective, and then David would give a theological perspective, and it was great. So this is a Google map of Israel, and each of the flags that you see there are different sites that we visited. There were 27 sites in all that we visited over a 9-day period. So you can imagine we were moving pretty quickly. I don't think we really stayed in any one particular location for more than an hour before moving on to something else. But Israel is about the size of New Jersey, the state of New Jersey. So how we did this was we would visit regions. Of course, we came in at Tel Aviv, so you can see that along the Mediterranean shore. And we did some things there and would move to different regions until that whole, we covered everything that you see there. We ended up back in Jerusalem and spent probably 3 days there before flying out. Okay, I think this is where I'm going to hand it over to Tim and let him share some things.
Well, as you can imagine, well, first of all, I didn't realize I wasn't first on the list to go with you. I was second, but anyway, I was grateful to go, and actually, I was even more grateful that I had two pastors that were able to, talk about the Bible, explain areas of Jerusalem. Of course, Pastor Rex and Pastor David. So that was a great team to go with. So I was very fortunate for that. So here, and I took some notes. I didn't realize how much I had forgotten over the past several months of the particulars. So I made up some notes earlier today to hopefully guide us through it. And this is the Valley of Elah, which is where David slew Goliath. And it's a pretty interesting place and interesting perspective that I received from David Whiting. He talked about how Goliath really didn't have an opportunity or a chance. He was outweighed by the skill that David had with a slingshot. Back then, they were very skilled. They could hit anything. So he didn't really have a chance necessarily, but David had his skill with a slingshot, and he also had God behind him, because David was very, very respective and believing in God. It was really, the battle was to honor God. So he slew Goliath there, and fulfilled the story in the Bible. I believe that can be read in 1 Samuel 17. This is the hill that the Israelites would have been on, and on the other side of the valley there was where Goliath and the Philistines were on the opposite hill. And if you remember, the story basically says that the Philistines used to come down every day for, I believe, 40 days and taunt them, and then finally David stood up and against him. This is a little creek. I imagine at one time it was much deeper, but where David picked up the 5 stones, the 5 smooth stones, as it says in the Bible, and fortunately for me, I was able to find the one that actually hit Goliath. because it had a chunk taken out of it. So it hit Goliath, a part broke off, and God led me right to that stone. So I took it home. This is Caesarea. This is a port city. I mean, you hear in the Bible they talk about cities and towns. I mean, we would probably view it more as a town or a village in geographical perspective. But this was Caesarea, and Herod the Great built this. They had no deep water ports on the Mediterranean, so Herod built this, and this allowed him to trade with other countries on the Mediterranean. A couple of things of note was Cornelius, a centurion, lived there. Peter received his vision about clean and unclean foods in Caesarea. Paul had his trial before Felix, and Paul was held a prisoner in Herod's palace. This is an area that a Colosseum where they used to have the chariot races, and as you can see, all the old ruins. Much of Israel is under constant excavation. This is an area of Herod's palace. You can see the floor there that still remains, and the area in the background is a saltwater swimming pool, we're told, in Caesarea that Herod built. He was kind of playing both sides. He wanted to please Caesar, but he also wanted to please the Jews. So he was kind of a divided character in his personality. This is another area of Caesarea. As you can see, the gates going through and the old stonework. I'm not sure it's here, but most of what you see dates back to that century. In other pictures and photographs we've taken, you'll see a black line, and that black line on the stone itself, that indicates what's been rebuilt. So if it's fallen down or been destroyed, it was rebuilt, and they designated that line to show what was original. This is an area in Caesarea of a Colosseum as well, still pretty well preserved. Was this a video? So this is a video of Medigo in Hebrew, which translated in Greek is Armageddon. And essentially this is where the final battle will take place in the end, as spoken about in Revelation 16. This is a major, on the way to a major trade route from Egypt to Babylon, Assyria, and Mesopotamia. And that was on our first day. David wasn't with us. He Skyped in or video phoned in to speak because he wasn't with us that first day. This next area is Capernaum, which is also was known as Jesus' hometown. Biblically, it says Jesus left Nazareth and went to Capernaum. So this was where he was during his ministry. This is also a place where Peter, Andrew, James, John, and Matthew were. And Pastor, jump in if I misspeak too on any of these items. But Capernaum was pretty interesting because this is a view of the synagogue there. This is, I believe it was told to us, this was rebuilt. This is 4th century. But on that, on the foundation, around the side, there was a plaque that the pastor and I saw where it was the original 1st century foundation that had been rebuilt over where Jesus preached, where Jesus spoke to the masses. This is the foundation and ruins of Peter's house. And you'll see above it there's like these beams. Well, that's a structure they built over the remnants of Peter's house which is right there. And when you walk into that building, there's a glass floor, so you can actually look down into the ruins and foundation works of Peter's house. This is an olive press. Normally there would be, I'm not sure if the pastor has other pictures of this, but there would be wood in there, a pole, and it would work around and press the olives. We saw this in a couple of different places, actually, around our tour. This is the shoreline of the lake there in Capernaum. Another picture of that. This is Chorazin, and this is one of the what would be known as the triangle of Jesus' ministry. There was Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, and that was kind of like the three major areas that Jesus preached at and did miracles at. Not that he didn't go other places, but it was the three major places. There's some more ruins there. And again, this if you look on the hillside, you can also see some rudimentary foundations. So it did spread farther out, but they're constantly excavating around Israel to expose other remnants. This is going into the backside of the synagogue. So every little town or village or city would have a synagogue that they would preach in. They would also hold public events, like maybe like a civil event, like the town hall, those type of things that we would experience here. And then once a year, they would go to the temple in Jerusalem. So this is the ruins of the synagogue there in Chorazin, and people would go there and listen to not only preaching but public events. And once the preacher, rabbi in this case, would speak, generally they were well versed in Scripture. Once they would speak, they would go to the back of the synagogue and they would sit on what is called the Moses seat. You can kind of, does this have a light on it? Okay. On where the placard is, you could see the seat on top, and has like handles on the side and a little bit of a back. That was known as the Moses seat. This is a replica. The actual one, my understanding, is in the museum, I believe. And they would sit in that Moses seat in the back, as a symbol of authority and authority for Scripture. So in this case, we had pastor had spoke, and everybody said it's a miraculous. It's a symbol of authority. We have to have him sit in the Moses seat. This was explained to us when we were in Chorazin of what would most likely be a manger, or Jesus' manger. They would line that with straw, and the baby would lay in that. From there, we went down to the Sea of Galilee, and we hopped on Noah's Ark. It's a little smaller than we expected, but there it is, and that's what it says. So we believed it. There's a picture of the Sea of Galilee. It's lower in relation to the rest of the country, and you can see the mountainsides around it. And it was interesting. You could just you could picture Jesus speaking to the masses there. There was always thousands of people, as it said, and you could just kind of picture it. When you're there, you just kind of feel it, sort of, This is the kind of the city side of the Sea of Galilee there, where we left out from. And then we're on to Mount Arabel. This is a video too, right? Yeah. And looking down, you see all the structures and houses there. And as we're coming around to the right is Magdala. Right there in the right-hand corner, you see a building and there's cars, and it goes out to the water. So Magdala was
city where Mary Magdalene was from, down below.
where Mary Magdalene was from. And when I first got there, the first night, I walked out to the water, and I'm thinking, I turn around, I see Mount Arbel,
Sea of Galilee.
and I'm thinking, man, Jesus was here. This is where Mary Magdalene was
First
from.
century synagogue on it.
Jesus probably, I mean, I'm speculating a little bit, but you know what?
Preached in that.
Biblically, we know that Jesus always went up to a mountain to pray, or a hill to pray. And I could just imagine him, you know, going up to Mount Arbel and praying to his Father. And that the hotel, the Magdala was hotel there, has an area that has a first century synagogue there, and they actually built over the top of the first century synagogue, and it's my belief. I have no reason not to believe that Jesus preached there, because Mary Magdalene was from there, and Mary was very close to him. So I wouldn't doubt at all if he preached there. And there was also from the remnants, they believe it was like a fish processing area within that first century village. We're on to the ancient city of Dan, and this is up in the northern part of Israel. It is said that Abraham or Abram walked through. If you look behind the scaffolding, there's like a gate there, and a lot of these places, even in the city of Jerusalem, a lot of these old gates are stoned off or walled off, and this one was as well. But it is said that Abraham walked through that gate. Going into the city of Dan. So some more ruins for that. Dan is where Jeroboam was the first northern king, and he set up an altar there, essentially for worship to keep. There was two tribes, if you will, or two parts of Israel that was divided back then, and he set up an altar there. And later, Josiah would go and destroy that, and you can read about that in 1 Kings 12 and 2 Kings 23. So this is the Jordan River. I'm sorry, go ahead. So this is the Jordan River, and when we first saw it, we're like, this is like a stream. This isn't a river. But when we're up in the northern part of the country, there was a snow-capped mountain there, Mount Hermon, I believe. And anyway, the water, when we were there, and we don't, I took, I think, like 800 pictures, so obviously we don't have time for that, but the amount of water coming off the top of this mountain and rushing down the Jordan River, which eventually feeds the Sea of Galilee and then on to the Dead Sea, is a tremendous amount of water. But because of agriculture and the population's need for water, it's about a tenth, we're told, the size of it was in Jesus' time. So if you could picture the Jordan River in some places being 30, 40 feet wide, it was probably 300 or 400 feet wide back in Jesus' time. In some places, certainly not everywhere. So this is the Jordan River. This is where is believed that where John did his baptizing, and as well as baptizing Jesus there. Just on the other side is Jordan, and their border was closed. I think it was our intention originally to go to Jordan for a day or two, but their border was closed, so we were not allowed over there. But you can see people from the Jordanian side, they come down the steps to see the area in question here. So everywhere you go this is still at the Jordan River there. Everywhere you go, there's Israeli military. They're young people. They have to serve a couple of years in the military. It's mandatory. So these young man and a woman were gracious enough to take a picture with me. I'm not quite sure why, but they did anyway. They agreed to it. But they're all very friendly and very well armed. Thankfully, in a lot of cases. So this is Caesarea Philippi, and this is an interesting place. And this is some of that. This is in the northern part of the country too. So this is some of that water that I was talking about. But there's a couple of things to note here. This was a pagan city, as I said, in northern Israel, and there's like, I'll move forward here. There's like these niches in the wall here, and they would worship pagan gods here. I don't know if there's an illustration, but this is some of the ruins there. It was literally carved into the side of the mountain. I think there was here we go. So if you look behind the buildings there, you can see those notches where these buildings were at one time. Not sure they're exactly like that, but essentially that's what was built there. They used to worship the god of Pan there, and you can see the difference. On the third one down, or second one down, the grotto of the god Pan, the court of Pan, and the nymphs, the temple of Zeus. So this was an area of pagan worship, but it also was the area that. Well, let me give you a little. This is near Mount Hermon, which has one of the largest springs that feeds the Jordan River, and it's the place where Peter made his profession of faith, or maybe his famous confession rather, that Jesus is the Messiah in Matthew 16, 13 through 20. And it's most likely Mount Hermon was the site of the Transfiguration in Matthew 17, 1 through 8 in the Bible.
Yeah, he'll be back up in a few minutes to share his the takeaways that he has from the trip. A few more sites I'd like to introduce to you. This is Qumran. What does anybody know what's significant about Qumran? Yes, right. It's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and there was a Jewish monastic community here in Qumran. Predates the time of Christ up until the end of the first century, and they were there as scribes. They would transcribe the scriptures, writing them out by hand meticulously. And then they also were preserving scrolls. And so this is the community. It's an interesting story of how the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. They were discovered by a shepherd boy. And it was actually in the evening, he was getting ready to go home, and he just took a rock and threw it into one of these caves, and he heard a crash, and he said, "Treasure." and it was too late to try to gather the treasure, so he made note of where it was and went home and brought some friends back with him the next day to gather the treasure, and he was disappointed to just find a broken vase with some old scrolls in it, thinking, oh, I lost my chance to get rich. But he had found a very significant artifact. So this is actually one of the caves where the scrolls were found. They were actually found in a number of caves. Now they've been numbered. I don't remember which number this is, but that little entranceway that you see is one of the caves where the scrolls were found. This is Masada, and Masada is known as the place where Israel had their last stand against the Roman army. You can see this pathway that's going up the side of the mountain here. Some on our team were brave enough to walk up that path. Tim and I said, no, thank you, we'll take the gondola. So we took that and made our way up to the top of Masada. Masada was a fortress that King Herod had built as a way to a place to protect him if he needed to get away. There's no indication that he ever was at Masada, but you can see some remnants here of the fortress, some more there. Here is a model of what it would have looked like in the 1st century A.D. Up top is the fortress, and what you see on the front end there would have been Herod's palace, his palace. The Roman army, of course, discovered that there were some Jews that were hiding out there at Masada, and so they sent a huge army, and this is just one of the Roman army camps. There were a number of these surrounding Masada, but inside that rectangular shape is where the Roman army would have been stationed. And this is a siege ramp that the Roman army built. I think it took them 2 or 3 years to build this siege ramp. Basically, they just kept piling more and more dirt so that they could send a battering ram up this siege ramp and begin to knock down the walls. What we know from history is that they sent that battering ram up. This was about 73 A.D., and they also had torches, with fire on it, and the wind was blowing in such a way that initially it was blowing back on the battering ram, and it almost caught the battering ram on fire. And if that would have happened, it certainly would have frustrated their efforts to try to take Masada. But by God's providence, I guess we have to acknowledge that the wind shifted and blew back towards Masada, and they were able to break through. And when they got through into this fortress, they discovered that almost everybody had committed suicide. I think there was one woman and a couple children that survived. They were hiding, and so the men ended up, it's really sad, they ended up putting their families to death, and then they committed suicide so that they wouldn't be taken prisoners by the Roman army and tortured. Okay, so this is En-Gedi. What we know about En-Gedi is going back to 1 Samuel in those years that David had been anointed king but had not yet assumed the throne because Saul was still king, and we know that Saul became jealous of David, and so David was on the run. And one of the places that he and his men went was En-Gedi, And this is where we're told that Saul had gone into a cave to relieve himself, and David and his men were hiding in the back of that cave, and David cut off a portion of Saul's robe and said, "Hey, I could have taken your life, but who am I to touch the Lord's anointed? So why are you after me? Why are you wasting your time?" But what was significant about this, let me pause here. This is an ibex. An ibex, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's kind of like a ram type or goat type of an animal that is there in Engedi. And they were running all around us. I did have the zoom on it, but I wasn't too far away from this particular animal. So that was pleasant to see them. But this is one of the reasons why David and his men went to Engedi, because it was an oasis for them. We do see some of the mountains there, and it's kind of the desert, but here it is an oasis in the middle of that desert with a beautiful waterfall. And you could see why David and his men, especially in the warmer temperatures, would have loved to get away to a place like this. Now this is a video. One of the things that you hope maybe you're picking up on as you're listening to this presentation is that we gained some new perspective. Things that we thought were a certain way, we discovered, no, I was wrong. I was thinking about this all wrong. For example, think back of the manger. How many of you have thought that the manger was something that was made out of wood, right? Because that's what we see at the tableau, right? It's Jesus was in a manger made of wood and with straw in it. But no, it was a stone. Well, here, we were actually en route to another site, and David just said, okay, we're going to stop here, and just for a couple minutes, and we went out, and, this should be a video. That one's not playing. This is what's significant here. The video was going to show, if we can get it to work, it pans from left to right. This is the left, and Jerusalem is on the left, and it would pan. It would take about 30 seconds to watch this pan all the way across. And this is the road to Jericho. The road to Jericho. How many of you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? And remember, the man was on the road to Jericho, and he was robbed, and then a priest and a Levi walks by him. It was the Samaritan that came and that helped him. But, I was like, okay, I had no clue. I just thought, here's Jerusalem, you got this little hill, and they come down it, and Jericho's on the bottom, and there's this little path. But no, actually, when we were there, and you can't see it from here, but in the distance, you can see a path where people were walking. And it's like, okay, you can understand why they would be targets if they were traveling that road themselves, why they would be an easy target for robbers. So that was just something very insightful, a new perspective on the way things actually were. Well, then, like I said, we ended up going to Jerusalem and spent the last 3 days there. This is a view from the Mount of Olives. Significant about the Mount of Olives is, number one, Jesus gave the Olivet Discourse there, which was a teaching about end-time events, which you can read about. I think it's Matthew 24. And then also, that's where Jesus is going to return, is at the Mount of Olives at the end of the tribulation period. Something significant is that there are over 70,000 graves on the Mount of Olives. And the Jews, even though they don't believe that Jesus is their Messiah, they do believe that their Messiah is coming at some point, and that there will be a resurrection of the dead. And they believe that their Messiah is going to come to the Mount of Olives, and that's also, so they want to be as close to the Mount of Olives so that when the Messiah returns, they'll be one of the first to be raised from the dead. But there are 70,000 graves there. So this is the old, Jerusalem actually is made up of Old Jerusalem and New Jerusalem. And we spent most of our time in Old Jerusalem. This is one of the gates going into the old city of Jerusalem. I believe it's the Damascus Gate. And when you go through here, there were a number of shops, basically people selling things, had little booths and things set up, and you could just walk through the market there. This is called a mikvah, and there were mikvahs all over, not only Jerusalem, but all over Israel. And I never really understood the significance of a mikvah. As you can see, it's filled with water. Can you have a guess what it might have been used for? What's that? Close. Baptisms? Yeah, it's ceremonial washings. And I thought that you read about the need for ceremonial washings to become purified, to become clean in a religious ceremonial sense. And so I thought that, maybe the Jews had to go through this in order to go into the temple or to go into the synagogue. And not necessarily, but every town had one of these. And there were specific times and times in a person's life, or times on the calendar year where they had to go through ceremonial washings. And so these were all over the place. This is, of course, the Wailing Wall. What you see there is not actually the wall of the temple itself. You may remember Jesus' prophecy that no stone would be left on top of the other. So the question was posed to us there, how do you explain this then? Well, this isn't the wall of the temple, it's the wall of the platform on which the temple stood. And there is no stone left of the original temple itself. This, of course, is the Dome of the Rock, which is on top of the platform. And it's in the location where the temple that Herod built was located. This is an Islamic shrine. Of course, Israel became a nation again in 1948, so they have control of this area. So a logical question that we asked is, why don't they just take this down and rebuild their temple? And Mickey, our tour guide, said, political. And they're scared because, they're afraid, what are the Palestinians going to do? What are the Muslims going to do if we take down this holy site of theirs? So they don't know what to do, and so they just leave it. But there is a strong Israeli military presence on top of the platform, but they're not there to protect this area from Palestinians. They're protecting it from zealot Jews who might want to bomb this so that the temple can be rebuilt. So it was interesting because our tour guide went into some great detail with all these soldiers around, and I could see they were getting a little fidgety with how specific he was getting, but I could tell he was obviously being accurate. So this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's one of two locations where archaeologists believe that Christ was crucified. And this is probably the more likely site. This you can see this, the Sepulchre, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the Greek Orthodox Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church are the custodians of this site. And so you could see religious artifacts all over. And in one sense, it kind of takes away from the experience. The other site that I'm going to show you is probably not the site, but you just appreciate it more because it's in a more natural environment. But this is actually where they believe that Jesus was crucified. I don't know if you can see the little box on the floor, but you could go down there and reach in and touch the stone, which they believe was Calvary, the stone on which Jesus was crucified. And you can see a picture of that encased here. This is actually where they believe that Jesus, it's in the same church, not too far away, where they believe this is where Joseph of Arimathea's tomb was, where Jesus was buried. And I think, if I can get this to work, I have a video of what it looks like inside of this structure. So again, they believe Jesus' body would have been laid on that area there. This is again the rock of the tomb, but they had a problem of people chipping away at it and wanting to keep pieces of it, so that's been enclosed as well, so you can't touch it. I went in there a couple times and just allowed it to all sink in. It was very moving to be there. Okay, so this is the other site where they believe Jesus could have been crucified. I don't know if you can make this out, but remember Golgotha, the place of the skull, right? This is why people think it could have been the site, because this looks a little bit like a skull. The eyes of it here, the nose here, the top of the forehead. Can you kind of make it out a little bit? When you're there, it was a little bit more obvious that does look a little bit like a skull, and you could see why people may have taken that to mean this could be a viable location. This would have been kind of like a stone that would have been rolled in front of a tomb. And this is the second site. You may have remembered the videos that I showed. I actually went into here and showed the inside of it. I think you can still see those on the church website if you want to. Again, I appreciated this environment more because it was more like a garden with a tomb in it. And but this is not the site that most archaeologists believe is where Jesus was crucified and buried. These are called ossuaries. This is something I learned while I was there. The Jewish burial custom I talked about on Easter a little bit, but after they would have family tombs. So when a family member died, they would wrap the body in the way that I talked about last week, place it in the tomb and allow the flesh to decompose. Then a year later, they would unwrap the body, and what would be left? The bones. And then they would take the longest bone and make an ossuary box so that they could fit all of the bones in it, place it back in the tomb to open up a space for the next family member. It was an interesting process. This is the Garden of Gethsemane. I think I said this on the video, that when at the different sites that we visited, you have A sites, meaning archaeologists are pretty confident this is the place. Then you have B sites. We don't know for sure, but a lot of evidence suggests this is likely to be the place. Then you have C sites, your guess is as good as mine, right? This is a sea site for the Garden of Gethsemane. It's actually now being used as a memorial for the Garden of Gethsemane, and where Jesus, again, went with his disciples on a number of occasions. The night that he was betrayed, he went there and prayed with Peter, James, and John. It's still a very beautiful area, and Gethsemane means olive press, so there would have been an olive press here, or at least where the actual Garden of Gethsemane. We did go into New Jerusalem and had the privilege of going to the Israel Museum, and this is a model of the city of Jerusalem, what it would have looked like in the first century during the days of Jesus. And so just fascinating. Obviously, it's not the size, but a miniature model, but a lot of detail to it. And we just found this really captivating. Of course, this is the temple, what it would have looked like, Herod's palace. And over here to the left, in the front left corner, is what Jerusalem, the whole city, the size would have been in the time of King David. Just that corner piece right here, front of that building with the red roof to the end. That would have been the whole city of Jerusalem in the time of King David. It was called the City of David. This is just a couple things I wanted to point out from the Israel Museum. This was fascinating as well. We don't know if this is just one of the ways that they did crucifixion in the first century, or if it's the primary way. But how many of you remember seeing pictures of Jesus on the cross with one foot in front of the other and the nail going through both feet, right? This is an actual bone that was found of a man that was crucified, where the nail is going through the ankle. And so you see the picture underneath, that the feet are actually not on top of each other, but on either side of the cross beam and nailed in each side. It could have been the way that Jesus was crucified. This is the sarcophagus of King Herod, which was discovered at another fortress of his, known as the Herodian, and the sarcophagus of Caiaphas. Who was Caiaphas? High priest, right? So they found his sarcophagus as well. This is pretty interesting. This is a piece of the rock of the corner of the temple. It would have been in the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. And David Whiting gave us a story related to this. This is where the priest would have blew the trumpet just before the Sabbath to announce the beginning and the end of the Sabbath. And he would do it at this location, but he also did it at another time, on the day of Passover, when the lamb was being sacrificed for the nation of Israel. And guess what? At the time, he did it about 3 o'clock, I think he said, in the afternoon. And at that exact time that the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, Jesus died on the cross. And they blew the trumpet and announced it to everybody. That was fascinating. This is the one adventurous thing that I did when I went to Jerusalem. This is the Hezekiah's tunnel. It's a tunnel that goes underneath the city of Jerusalem, and there's a fresh spring that runs water from one end of the city to the other, so that enemy armies couldn't get to it. And if they were under siege for some reason, they would have access to water for a long time. And so this tunnel is 1,750 feet long, and we walked it. And how they pulled this off in the days of King Hezekiah, that's when this was built. It still stuns people today, engineers, how this was accomplished. We just know that They had a group starting at one end and a group on the other, and somehow they met in the middle. And it's just quite fascinating. This couple that you see with me are my son-in-law's parents. It is Joseph and Danielle Contreras, and they are missionaries living in Jerusalem and teaching at a school in Bethlehem. So I had the privilege of doing something that nobody else on the team did. I got to go to Bethlehem. And so I wanted to share with you a couple pictures related to that. This is the Church of the Holy Nativity, where Jesus supposedly was born. And I took a video of the cave of what it looks like where they believe that Jesus was born. And you can see this here again, just like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church are the custodians of this. But pretty fascinating. We got there just as they were getting ready to close, so they let us go in, but we couldn't stay very long. But I was glad that I was at least able to see it.
I wish I could give you more as a real tour guide would.
Yaakov told us a lot, which was really good.
You can see the natural stone there.
The entrance to the cave, they opened.
Okay. All right. As we look to wrap things up here in the next few minutes, I did want to invite Tim back up to just take a couple minutes to share with you some takeaways that he has from this trip. Tim?
Well, this will be quick. Actually, I've had a couple people over the past couple of months say to me, what was, like, did you have like an aha moment or, this great revelation type moment? And really, to me, the whole thing was that moment. It had the opportunity to kind of bring the Bible to life for me. Even now, I'll be reading through, for example, just reading through Matthew the other day, and Jesus was with his disciples, and he said, and they went to Capernaum, and I'm like, I was there. This is cool. And for me, it just, again, it brings the whole thing to life for me, whether you're reading the Old Testament or New Testament. And that's one thing David Whiting had said to us: you'll never read the Bible the same way again. And I know, a lot of people, including myself, we look for these big moments, so to speak, to happen in our lives, for God to do something that, sits maybe out of the ordinary. And you hear people testify to that many times where they've had this, amazing experience or something like that. I think of Don Butera. I mean, he's very animated, and just seems like he has all this stuff going on, I'm left out of the loop somehow, I feel. But as I reflect back on my life and I think about things that happen, I can point countless times where God has guided me, directed me, been there by my side, and without even knowing it, really. You just, until you actually look back, wow, if that hadn't happened, if God hadn't directed me, if this wasn't the case, I don't know what would have happened in my life. Something as simple as, and I know it sounds ironic, but something as simple as finding out your wife's in the hospital, that she has to be hospitalized, and you got to get to Florida quickly, going online, and within 3 hours you're flying on a plane down to Florida. And knowing that those flights weren't available just a few weeks ago. Well, how did that happen? it wasn't by coincidence, it was by God's design and God's direction. So that's my takeaway.
Don't go too far. I would just share, again, people have asked me a similar question. What was the one thing that stood out? And I'll tell you, it wasn't one thing. It's what we did over and over and over again. As I already mentioned, at each site, 27 sites, we would get the archaeological and historical perspective from Mickey, our tour guide. But then David Whiting would pull out his Bible. We'd look at what the scriptures had to say about the location that we were at and its significance. And then he'd share a devotional that would tie to our life. And he also brought a worship leader from his church. And so we would worship at those locations and we would pray together. And then we go to the next site and do it all over again, over and over again. And I was just tremendously blessed by being able. I suspected if I went with David Whiting, it would be that kind of a trip. He did not disappoint. He did not let me down. I'll never forget doing that. Again, coming back home, if you've probably noticed maybe a little bit more emphasis in my teaching and preaching on some of the history and archaeology of the scripture. Even last Sunday when I went into the Jewish burial customs, one thing that David said is to understand the words of the Bible, we need to understand the world of the Bible. And so I thought that was well said, and I made a commitment coming back that I'm going to do my best in all the teaching and preaching opportunities I have to try to help you to understand the world of the Bible better. So time will tell if I'm successful in that or not. So those are some things that were takeaways for me. Let me just say this before we just take a couple minutes to allow you to ask some questions, and I'll invite Tim back up to field some questions as well. But I would love to be able to coordinate a trip for people of our church to go on a trip to Israel, and I'm gonna shoot for 2024, so not next year, but in 2 years, but next year we'll have to start planning and preparing for it. I did decide because of where I'm at in terms of my understanding of the nation, that I would not want to lead the trip once we're there. I would let somebody with a little bit more experience because, again, these guys just made the trip totally worthwhile because of the knowledge and the experience that they have. As a matter of fact, David has been doing this for 10 years, an average of 2 groups a year, 35 people. I think he said he's brought over 400 people to Israel in the last 10 years. So years of experience. I want to find somebody like that we could team up with once we get there. But you'll be hearing more about it. I'd love to have many from our church experience that together. So you'll hear more. Tim, why don't you come back up, and you can just take maybe 5 minutes to give you a chance to ask us some questions. You can direct it to either one of us specifically or to just us together, and one of us will seek to answer it. Yes, Carol. Yeah, so that is where the Gaza Strip is, right? So it is an area that they try to keep tourists away from because you never know. You never know what's going to be going on there. I will say this, as Tim pointed out, that originally the trip was planned for us to go into Jordan, and the borders were closed, but it was for COVID. It wasn't because of hostility or anything. So we actually did get to go to more sites in Israel than what was originally planned. And I don't know about you, Tim, but I'm actually glad that it worked out that way. I'm glad we could spend more time in Israel and seeing the things that we did. So, another question? Yes, Amy. Yes. Yeah, those types of things came up over and over. For example, the tour guide, Mickey, said, "You've probably heard that Jesus was a carpenter or the son of a carpenter. He wasn't. I don't know if you saw, there aren't many trees in Israel. It's all rocky terrain. They said he was a builder, but he probably would have been more of a stonemason than a carpenter in the way that we understand it today." So things like that were being, shared with us that I was like, okay, I never thought of that before. Until you're here and hear that, you don't know. Any other questions? Yes, Lisa. No, but well, yes. I mean, that there is the desire, and there are groups within Israel, Jews, that are making preparations for a third temple, so that when that day comes, they're ready. So I don't know all the details of that, but again, that is a desire that the Jews have to eventually be able to rebuild the temple so that they can resume the sacrifices. Right? Anything else? Okay, I'm sorry we went a little bit longer, but we only get to do this once. So thank you for coming out. We're going to take just a 2-minute break to allow you to leave if you need to, but then we're just going to have about a 5-minute, 10-minute at most quarterly business meeting if you want to stick around for that. If not, have a great evening. Thanks for coming out.